Hello everyone, my name is Kent. I'm with 214 Alpha. We've been running a series of these videos that describe the applicability of our platform to discrete communities. Overall what we do is we provide the basis by which a community could keep their money and their affairs local. And that begins with economic self-sufficiency. And it's a great idea, but what people will frequently ask is how does that actually apply to me, right? It's a good question. So I've done a series of these videos. One of them talks about how the business community business district in a small town might launch and sustain economic self-sufficiency and economic stimulus without taxes or bond levies, just by mitigating fiscal leakage, which would be money that flows to Visa or PayPal or whoever else. They basically keep their money local, and it actually works out. Second video was one that talked about how that same business community might introduce this program in a pilot program in a within a farmer's market. Let's say a farmer market that happens every Sunday. They might be able to introduce this in a limited basis just to see if it works for them. I did one on how this applies to an educational community, like such as around charter schools or home schools. It's the same idea, it's just a different community. And I did one on how this actually applies to a real estate agency, how it would help the real estate agents within an agency, how it would help them do better lead generation and referral marketing while generating an alternative stream of revenue. So in this one I want to talk about it's not just the neighborhood, but it's the neighborhood that might surround a really good old school hardware store, right? It's like my favorite job ever. Like when I'm talking hardware store, I'm not talking about a big box retailer. I'm talking about your corner store that's kind of funky. It's got all kinds of stuff there, right? And I sort of play that kind of thing appeals to me. Like I'm kind of a handy guy. Actually, I got this table behind me that I'm trying to repair for somebody, and it's one of the things broke, right? It's actually this sits in the corner there and it broke. So so I picked up a piece of wood out of the trash. It's hardwood, and I'm gonna I've got a bandsaw and a couple of the tools. I'm just gonna repair this, put it together, and take the table back. So this sort of thing is it's something I can do, but part of why I can do it is I worked at this old hardware store, and there was a guy named Daryl that worked there. Daryl's like, I think he was 92 at the time, and this is when I was in my 20s. So, memory eternal, Daryl. He was a lot of help to me, man. He was in the back room, and it was a big thing for him. It was really important that he was able to continue working, and he was, putting the pricing labels on the merchandise, whatever. But from Daryl's perspective, man, Daryl wasn't constrained to the silos that are in technologically automated systems. It wasn't like lumber or plumbing or paint or flooring. To him, it's all one problem space, right? So he taught me, for instance, that let's say it's Saturday and a woman comes in and says, for some reason the linoleum is all bumpy under the toilet, and I'm thinking, you're about ready to spend $15,000 on a new floor because you got a leak, and you got to talk through that whole thing, right? And that whole thing, from her perspective, transcends multiple departments, and that's a sort of full service that you get in an old school, hardware store that you wouldn't necessarily get at a big box place. Also, if you're a hardware store like the one in my old neighborhood in Portland, they had canning goods, and they would give you tips on how to can your fruits and vegetables because people grow that stuff in the street. They grow it right there on the median. And so when you're walking through the neighborhoods there, and I'll talk about that just in a second, when you walk through the neighborhoods there's this great fruits and vegetables and flowers, and these people will sell that to each other. It's kind of cool, actually. It's really charming. And they also have stuff on how to make soap. I mean, it's not your traditional store, right? It's this neighborhood hub, right? In terms of the neighborhood I just moved from, if you read any of the Beverly Cleary books, there's a girl named Ramona that's featured pretty prominently in the book. She lived on Klickitat Street. So that was the street we lived on. We lived on Klickitat Street, right there in Northeast Portland. And it's a really charming little neighborhood. Rose City Park. A lot of the houses were built, in the 1920s, and there's a lot of sidewalks, tree-lined streets, and you can ride your bicycle all over the place, or just walk to the hardware store. And there's, garage sales, and there's people that, will can or they'll make food and they'll sell it to each other. There's, street parties where they close the street off and the neighbors are having a barbecue and there's music playing and kids playing in the street. And, there's, there were these people that lived 6 blocks down, and they grew mums, and they grew these azaleas, and they grew all these beautiful flowers, and then they would just sell them as like this little roadside. It's just like, it's a hobby, right? Obviously, they grew flowers. Our house had these amazing lilies all the way along the side, and people just loved it. And so there's a lot of that goes on there. It's part of why it's such a charming place to live. And then the hub, of course, is the hardware store, and the hardware store employs all kinds of people. They got young kids there, and they got old dudes there. And when you go in there, like my son, he's the kind of kid that would build just some random thing. He found a pipe and a spring in the street, and he wants to build something. He'd go to the hardware store on his bicycle, and they would walk him through the whole thing. It's a full-service type of thing. It's a, teach you about canning, and they'll teach you about how to build a little cannon out of something. I mean, they'll just help you with all kinds of stuff. It's a great deal. So that's a community, right? If you think about it, that's a community. People want to, they want to do business, and they want to do interaction with the people that are in their neighborhood, and that's a charming thing. The existing systems that we've got are actually more biased towards, well, I guess I would say more centralized. It's like you go to a store and it's usually from a central perspective, the store, right? And you could do garage sales. It's definitely decentralized, but it has its own problems, right? You don't know who the people are that are coming through there. You don't know, it's a cash-only business. You don't know the quality of the goods that are being sold, et cetera. So what I'm proposing is that there might be an opportunity for, like, this neighborhood hardware store to actually, they could introduce this neighborhood app, if you will, that would emphasize this community, which actually has a lot of transactions that happen within the community. And I want to talk through, we have a platform that has 7 pre-integrated functions, and the reason we integrate these functions out of the box is that we find that these people, like the people at the hardware store, or the real estate agents, or the business community, or the educational, or whatever community that I've talked about in the past, they don't want to have to maintain 7 different discrete integrations. That's just not their thing. And maybe they do, but most people don't. Most people don't want to build their own in-house IT staff to build out and maintain a bunch of integrations. So we do all that stuff. And we provide services that helps them basically grow this into I guess you could call it a business. It's basically how to create an economic self-sufficiency. So the first one is digital identity. Ours is a mobile application, and it facilitates I hate to say connectionless. It doesn't require face-to-face interactions, but there's a real benefit to having that type of interaction, right? But if you're going to use an electronic system, you've got to have digital identity. And if you're using any kind of electronic media at all, email or Facebook or whatever else, that's an example of your digital identity. As I've shared in other videos before, I have substantial background in information security and anti-fraud, and my specific area of expertise has to do with the use of fake profiles to pervert the perception of reality. And so when I've been used in the context of anti-fraud, they want to utilize our services so they can make sure that people aren't orchestrating a bunch of fake accounts to pervert perceived reality from the perspective of that company for the purposes of fraud, right? And we all know that happens now. I used to talk about this even 4 years ago, and people would say, how could that be the case? Now people understand. Fake accounts are real. They also understand that people can be very deft in the orchestration of these fake accounts. We just don't allow that. Like that, this is my company, and we built this from the ground up. We're not going to allow that sort of thing. It's not just that we have digital identity. We got to make sure that you are who you say you are. We got to be able to trust this. Because if we're going to build a community, it's got to be high trust. We can't have a lot of nonsense with these fake accounts. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing is communication. And communication is the ability to communicate with others, right? And it's not just in the form of an interactive chat between 2 or more people, because that is the metaphor we use. But it's also the ability for a vendor or a neighbor, right? I mean, actually, I can use an example in a second. But the neighbors. Let's say the neighbors 6 blocks down that grow flowers, they sell them alongside the road. That's basically a vendor, right? And they probably aren't going to want to go through the rigmarole of creating an official business thing. Let's just say they want to sell to their neighbors, which is what they're doing right now. They put a sign up, people buy $5 bouquet, and they take it home. Ta-da, I got flowers, right? So that's what they're doing. It's a little extra money to help pay for their gardening hobby. And so, they might create a presence on this platform that looks like a storefront, right? And they'd be able to show, here's some stuff, and interact with us. You could send us some messages, that sort of thing. So that's the second thing of the 2 of the 7 capabilities. That's digital identity and communication. The third one is commerce, because this is essentially a commerce-based platform. It's something like your community's own e-commerce platform. And within this, we leverage on the back end. This is something you don't have to know about, but on the back end, we use a technology called blockchain. And I don't want to overwhelm you with it, but blockchain, one of the key benefits of it, it's a distributed ledger. That's what blockchain is. And everybody that has a copy of the ledger is auditing it nonstop. And that massively mitigates fraud. Again, remember, my background's security and anti-fraud. So this is something I realize is that if we invest in blockchain, we might be able to mitigate fraud. So we use that, right? And you don't need to know about it. But one of the great benefits of blockchain is it comes with substantial sophistication right out of the box, right? So in commerce, you get buy, sell, trade, auction. You can do payment plans. You can do subscriptions. You can do a lot of really sophisticated stuff built into this thing. And you do that through agreements, contracts, what they call them, smart contracts. And one of the greatest benefits of blockchain is it facilitates high trust transactions between strangers. And that's a fundamental part of having a high trust, economy, microeconomy, if you will. So, so again, I talk about. I can put my hand up here. Which hand did I have? Digital identity, communication, commerce. The fourth one is banking, and what that does is that enables you to use a currency and be able to send it to somebody else, and it also has a built-in support for microcredit loans and crowdsource funding. But here's the really cool thing, man. The user of this platform doesn't need to know much about how that actually works. In fact, the hardware store could call this the frog dollar. Actually, I've been talking about the frog dollar all the time because it's funny, it's silly. And it's just like, it's really no different than how Starbucks handles its app. On the Starbucks app, you go in there and you say, you're at the point of sale, you're standing in front of the register, and you say, I'd like to put $10 on my mobile application, on my Starbucks app, and then I'm going to buy a $2.50 cup of coffee, and that's of course going to leave $7.50 credit, right? It's a non-redeemable token, if you will, right? And Starbucks now has this, I guess you can call it a petty cash account that they can leverage for building their own business. And the customer can't really redeem it for more cash. They can just use it for Starbucks goods and services. And of course, they are incentivized to because they get a discount for doing so. It actually gives them a better return on investment. But that actually has a lot of benefits for Starbucks, right? And what I'm proposing is that you could really use the same thing within a community. Actually, that's what we do. So within the context of this, this hypothetical community centered around a hardware store and an old school hardware store that emphasizes community, is that the hardware store could sponsor this application that might actually incentivize people in the neighborhood to not just engage in trade with the hardware store, but also with one another. And because they're sponsoring it, they become associated with investing in community. Because there's a lot that goes on in a community. There's actually tremendous wealth that happens in a community. And in the context of the people that grow flowers, they could actually use the application to sell some of their flowers to a neighbor, and there could be an exchange of these frog dollars, which could be redeemable from the store for fiat cash, for US dollars, right? So there's a lot of really cool stuff in there, and it's really not rocket science. It's really the same thing that Starbucks does. It's just adapted to peer-to-peer transactions, transactions between neighbors, right? So that's the 4 functionalities. The 5th one is reputation. Reputation is a really fundamental part of trust. And so this is an accrued reputation, and you can only get this reputation through having transactions with others. It's not something like, oh yeah, I give this guy 5 stars because I think he's cool. You can only give someone a rating if you've had a transaction with them. And there's a lot of dimensions to reputation. I have an entirely different presentation that talks about this at great length. But this actually starts building a really interesting model here. It could be that, let's say, for instance, this is another great example. There's a guy that lives in the neighborhood, and he used to own a mechanic shop, and he's actually really, really great mechanic. But when he sold his business, the provision was that he would not work on cars newer than a certain year. And so he doesn't, right? He honors that. But he's like the best neighborhood mechanic, without a doubt. And his specialty is carburetors. Now, I don't expect most of y'all to know what that is, but a carburetor is, most modern cars use fuel injection, which basically means the computer's doing it. But carburation is before that, and carburation is it's a bit of an art, right? It has to do with air flow and air density, and you have to change the choke in the winter, different than the summer. And if you're at 6,000 feet elevation versus sea level, it's all that stuff. Man, the guy knows it inside and out. So he might be the kind of person you could take your carburetor issue to if you have an old truck or if you have a lawnmower or something. But he might not want to do business with neighbors that don't have a reputation of something or above, which makes sense, right? I'm like that. I don't want to have to deal sometimes, So you could set that into an account where you might want to be able to choose who you do business with. And it goes the other way with the vendor. It could be that somebody in the neighborhood says, "Hey, I build fences," and you might say, "Well, I'm not sure if I want to do that. I don't see your reputation," right? But that flips another way. It could be that there's incentive built into the system to give a guy a chance, right? And actually, he's a really good example. There's all this hullabaloo about homeless, and there's a lot of homeless in Portland, but most people don't go and talk to them, which is too bad. If you actually go out and talk to them, you'll find that an awful lot of them are actually from Portland proper. This is their hometown, and for whatever reason, medical reasons or something else, they've actually just landed. They've come back home, and they found they can't afford to live there, so they're living out of their cars. So here's the thing that's fascinating. Go to the people who are fastidious about sweeping around their cars and go talk to them. And frequently, it's fascinating, frequently, they used to run a business or they understand a lot about that, and they're all of a sudden they don't have a place to stay. say, and they're trying really hard to regain respect among the neighbors. They're really trying to do that. So there is a basis for being able to allow those people to have a social redemption based on merit, based on their demonstrative contribution to the community. And it could be in the form of them doing a neighborhood watch or cleaning or something like that. It's built into the platform. It could be a dimension of the reputation system. And I think that would have a lot of benefit. I have an entirely different plan about this I'm not going to elaborate on that I think would be really effective. So anyway, so that's reputation. I talked about digital identity, communication, commerce, banking, reputation. The final two is arbitration. Arbitration is the ability to do conflict resolution, which because you're going to have disputes. We use a private administrative process using Notary, and it basically takes the form of negotiated agreements going back and forth through a Notary. It doesn't have to go through the courts. It's actually really cost effective, and it's really biased towards mutually beneficial outcomes that doesn't require lawyers and all this threats that people go through and all that stuff. So it's really biased more towards social cohesion and mutual satisfactory outcomes. And it's based in common law precedent, which means that it's still admissible within any jurisdiction, frankly, because the legal jurisdictions are built upon the common law precedent anyway. So anyway, that's the sixth. The seventh one is governance, which sounds like government because most people don't use the word governance, but if you work in the private sector, governance is really usually takes the form of roles and responsibilities, policies and procedures, and access and permissions. Most of it's invisible. It's like some people have access to this and they don't have access to that, and what are they supposed to do? And there's a certain set of expectations in terms of responsibilities and that sort of thing. So it could be, for instance, that somebody decides that they're going to champion a cause for the neighborhood school to leverage the contributions of a lot of different neighbors, and they would bring together things. And they would say, I anticipate, let's say they want to build a playground for a local school, and they said, well, we'll bring in, $30,000 in the next 6 months, so we can build a playground that satisfies the requirements of the community. It's a pretty simple thing. But it could be that person just didn't do a good job of it, in which case now they're accountable to that, and then they're cycled out and somebody else takes their place. That's another simple example of governance in the context of a community. All that stuff's built in. So that's all built in within a single user experience. And so people that are running the community, which might be sponsored by the hardware store, they have all that stuff built in, and they don't have to actually manage all the technology. One wonders, of course, why would the hardware store bother, right? I mean, if they're going to take on the lion's share of managing governance and doing all this stuff, why would they bother? Why would it matter to them? And it's actually pretty simple. It's a commerce platform, right? Okay, so beyond the point that you're actually getting a branding benefit. It could be that this is the way the hardware store really gets out there and connects with the community in the way that says, we're going to give you, 20 frog dollars if you actually, come in and refer to people like you, right? Which is actually a great way to market. It's your best customers are usually from your best customers. And if you have this great high trust relationship with a neighbor, a customer, you could say, look, if you brought 2 other neighbors like that, I would give you 20 frog bucks, right? And the benefit from not just the retailer, not just from the hardware store, but also the other people who participate with this economy, is that when people buy goods and services from you using a frog dollar, you don't have to go to Visa to verify the transaction, right? Because, just using a simple example, because that Visa or MasterCard or American Express or whatever fee thing is really a bizarre labyrinth. But a really simple example is Visa is typically, it's like 2.3% plus 10 cents per transaction. Dude, that adds up, man, and that just cannibalizes margins. It just kills margins. So if a retailer, such as the hardware store or anybody were to transition, say 20% of the transactions over to the frog dollar, now that's that much less they have to pay Visa, which helps their margins, right? And with that increase in margins, they could use to justify more, it gives them a little bit more room to move in terms of, competing with the big box or doing promotions and that sort of thing. It also forms the basis by which they can do some really cool affiliate marketing, if you will. Let's say there's a neighbor in the neighborhood that really knows about carburetors or really knows about canning or really knows about flowers. They might want to do this thing in the hardware store proper to actually do some of their business, really kind of bring all that together. That's all built in. Again, one of the communication functions that's built in is the ability to communicate with the vendor themselves. So let's say that you went to an event at the hardware store and the carburetor guy's there or the flower lady's there, and you want to say, I just want to subscribe to more stuff that you're doing. Let's stay in touch, right? So that's all built in. But there's an additional benefit beyond that, is that it's a commerce platform. It's all built in, and we charge transaction fees, right? Because there's a lot of good reasons to do so, which I can elaborate later. But here's the thing. Our customer, which would be, in this example, the people that run the hardware store, they get a really big chunk of that back, actually. We share a substantial portion of that with that customer, which might seem, counterintuitive, like why would you do that? There's a few reasons for it. One of them is really pragmatic. It actually just makes our platform cost effective. It takes very little to cross the threshold and become profitable. They actually end up getting a profitable e-commerce platform that's branded. It has their name. We private label this thing, so it has the name of the hardware store. So that's one of the benefits. But the second benefit is that we share that with them, because now it's in our best interest that they're successful, which begins to justify our support model, right? Our support model is not just some call center person that's 11 time zones away. Our support people look a little bit more like business analysts. So when we talk to our customer, we'll say, here's the thing, we're both getting transaction revenue out of this, and what we would propose is that you could do this idea that we've got to help elevate the number of transactions that are happening on your platform, the quality of it, because we share in common an interest for this to be successful. And so, again, from the perspective of the company that's sponsoring, which would be the hardware store, they get dramatically improved engagement with the community. I mean, technically, the neighbors in the neighborhood could use this sponsored app to facilitate transactions at their garage sale, because there's lots of those in the spring and the summer. The neighborhood's full of garage sales. There's just a lot of wealth in the community. And there's some benefits to say, this garage sale is exclusive to people that are in the neighborhood. Or there might be a program that invites people to become part of that through a probation period or whatever. But this actually elevates the brand of the hardware store, and it actually elevates their engagement with the people in the community, which would bring more business to them. And they actually pick up an alternative and diversified revenue stream, which would help them through downtimes, such as a recession, for example. If people stop spending as much money updating their homes because there's a recession, that can hurt a hardware store. But if the hardware store has facilitated transactions between peers, which actually increase during economic downturn, this actually makes the hardware store, which is probably a lumber store and also has canning goods, it has other stuff, it actually keeps them the hub, which in a lot of ways just brings people back to how things used to be, which kind of brings me back to Daryl. In this context, if you think about this reputation system, in this context, think about Daryl in the context of this thing, is that now he's dispensing knowledge, he's dispensing wisdom, and he's gaining reputation for that. And he's no longer in the back room, because he's the guy who's actually facilitating. Because the thing with Daryl is there's a lot of people like Daryl. They are like a who's who. They know who everybody is. I mean, right? They know who everybody is. And they are actually now incentivized to share that wisdom with the community. They end up bringing the community together. And they're no longer in the back room or marginalized staying at someone's house. They get to be out there in front and actually help bring the neighborhood together. And they get paid for that, because it builds a reputation, and they might actually have a frog dollar that's associated with it, right? I like the frog dollar thing. It makes me laugh. There's probably a better way to refer to it, but I find it funny. I just moved to Texas, and there's frogs everywhere, which just cracks me up every time. It's total unrelated aside. Lizards, too. Who knew, right? They just walk all over the place. So I think that's about it. So if you have any questions, or look, here's the thing. If you have any idea, like I get this all the time now. I mean, like every single day. It's funny. People will say, what about our community? I'm like, oh, yeah, it applies here. So it's just basically coming up with an idea about how our platform would apply to your community. And then, again, it's in your name. We brand it in your name. So, from the perspective of your community, you're doing it. It's just powered by 214. So in terms of time to value, let's say you want to work with us. We have a platform, so what we do is we put your logo and your brand on it. In just a few weeks, you get an app that you can take out, and you can say, hey, look what we did, right? It's going to require customization. So, I mean, like I said, in just a few weeks, you can get the app. It's downloadable from the iTunes store. People can play with it. But it's going to require some customization, and that's professional services. So that's built into our licensing model, and it's a SaaS-based model. It's basically a subscription service once that's up and going. So I think you'll find us easy to work with, and it's a quick time to value. I've been working with some amazing communities literally all over the world on this one. So anyway, hope you all have a good day, and go out and enjoy yourself. See ya.